Good morning and welcome. Thank you for everybody for coming here today to our first CFAC meeting of 2020. So I hope you guys all had a great holiday. My name's Dave Moore. I'm the Acting Deputy Director for Planning and Modal Programs for Caltrans. And for those of you on the webcast, please note we are in a listen-only mode. Participants, you can submit written comments to the CFAC email site, which is cfac@dot.ca.gov. But these comments, we'll consider these comments when we can, but we may not get to all those comments or get to those comments, but they'll be there for the record. A little bit of housekeeping. First of all, if anybody in the room here hasn't signed in on the sign-in sheet, we'd like to get you to sign in on the sign-in sheet. The Wi-Fi, we provide some information in your packet about the Wi-Fi. That's actually has changed now from what's listed in your pamphlet. So you now have to go to the CSU SB-visitor Wi-Fi, and then it'll ask you for some information there, but then you'll be able to get onto the Wi-Fi system. The restrooms are out the door and to the right of the exit, down the hall and on the left-hand side. And we did have a fire alarm this morning, so if that happens to go off again, the easiest way, we circle out this building out behind here, out to the open area there. So hopefully it won't go off anymore today. Before I go over the agenda, I wanted to thank Dr. Kimberly Collins and Kathleen Ramirez of Cal State San Bernardino for their generously providing us with this facility for our meeting today. So thank you. I'd also want to share a little bit of changes that we have going on in the freight office within Caltrans. Yatman Kwan has returned to his Southern California freight role, but will continue to participate with the CFMP efforts, with the California Freight Mobility Plan efforts. And then Erin Thompson in the back of the room there, she is now our acting office chief for freight planning. Want to wave at everybody? As you're already aware, the majority of the CFAC meeting is going to be focused on the draft Freight Mobility Plan, the CFMP, and we look forward to your valuable feedback as we go through it today. And then in terms of the agenda review today, we're going to kick off the meeting today. We're going to have a welcome message from Michael Beauchamp, the District 8 Director. And joining him will be Ray Wolf with the San Bernardino County Transportation Authority. After that, if you look at your agendas, we had Marlon Flournoy on the agenda. Unfortunately, he's not able to attend today. He's out. Everybody seems to be coming down with the flu right now. So Yatman and Nieves Castro will be speaking on his behalf on that agenda item. And then Yatman will provide an overview of chapters 1 through 5 of the CFMP and give you guys a chance to provide your feedback on that. For the item number 4, for the project list methodology, I will be speaking on that along with Avital Barnea from CalSTA and Nieves Castro and Yatman as well. And then after that, we'll break for lunch, and there's some information in your packets there about where you could go for lunch, and there's lots of stuff right here in the building close by. After lunch, Yatman will give an overview of the implementation actions and request your input regarding which actions you deem as a priority. This will be done through a breakout session. And then as you can see on the agenda in front of you, Andre Freeman was scheduled to present. Unfortunately, he's unable to make it today with CARB. So Dylan Miner will present the concept paper for the freight handbook on his behalf. So another change there. And then after that, on item 7, we will have Kimberly Collins, who will be presenting the Planning for a Sustainable and Equitable Global Business Systems in the Inland Empire. And then after Dr. Collins' presentation, we'll have updates from Monica with FHWA, Don Cheeser from CTC, Avital Barnea from CalSTA, and Nieves Castro representing Caltrans. So, and finally, we'll have closing comments, including time for public comments and the next steps for discussion we'll have today. So with that, we're going to just jump right into it, and hopefully we could keep a little bit on track today so we could give everybody a full lunch. But I'd like to welcome up here Michael Beauchamp.
I guess I'll start out by apologizing because last minute I found out Ray was going to be here, so I asked him to come up with me, which shows the great partnership that we have in District 8 with our local partners. Let's see, where's I do have. Okay. Guess I should have rehearsed. I have to apologize again, huh? How do I?
Well, Mike, while you're getting that set up, I want to go ahead and explain why I'm on crutches here today. So I thought, the state's focus is more and more on active transportation, so I thought maybe I'd delve into that realm. And my son left a skateboard at the end of the street, and so I brought it home, sort of. The wise thing for an old guy to do is to pick it up and just take it home, right? But I thought, I used to ride a skateboard. I can certainly do this. So I jumped on it, and pretty quickly I was launched into the street. So I'm here to recommit myself to CFAC that my focus is once again totally on freight. I am not going to be an active transportation person anymore.
So thank you for that story, Ray. Thank you for inviting District 8 to give a welcome for the very important meeting for CFAC. My name's Mike Beauchamp. I'm the Caltrans District 8 Director. Just wanted to point out that, freight movement through our district is very, 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 very important. We have two of the busiest freight routes in the nation, Interstate 10 and Interstate 15, which greatly impacts our district. And a lot of that is passed through between the ports and the rest of the nation. With that being said, anytime I get a chance to talk about District 8, I'm going to take that opportunity, and I want to, if there's only one thing you remember from my welcome, it's that District 8 is great. It's a great place to live. It's a great place to work. It's a great place to raise a family. And it's a great place to go to school. My son actually graduated. One of my sons graduated from Cal State San Bernardino. And it's a great place to visit. Now, we are two counties, San Bernardino and Riverside County, and which both are self-help counties, and Ray is with SBCTA, and we have RCTC, which is the other self-help county. We have about 4.5 million residents between the counties. Let's see, we have 49 incorporated cities. The size of our district, and Dave may argue with me a little bit about this, but we're the largest district in California. We're at 28,650 square miles. And for those of you who don't know, San Bernardino County is the largest area-wise county in the nation. With that being said, we're responsible for 32 state routes and 4 interstate routes. We have about 7,200 lane miles that we're responsible for operating and maintaining. We have approximately 1,500 employees, half of which are located in downtown San Bernardino at our district office, and we have a state-of-the-art Transportation Management Center, Southern Regional Lab in Fontana, and we have 25 maintenance stations spread out between our district from San Bernardino all the way to Blythe and Needles. With that, I don't know if you want to add anything because we haven't practiced yet. This was a last minute thing that Ray agreed to do. I have a video that was presented at the December CTC, which kind of shows the not only our strong partnership, but what we're doing here in District 8. So I would like to play that.
Bulldozers, excavators, orange cones, hard hats, new lanes, fresh pavement, and new railroad tracks. The sights and sounds of construction activity are all over the Inland Empire. From Barstow to Bloomington to Blythe, progress is being made to reduce congestion and commute times while improving our air quality and reducing greenhouse gases. The level of transportation investment is unprecedented in our area, thanks to planning and teamwork among the California Department of Transportation, Riverside County Transportation Commission, and San Bernardino County Transportation Authority. Caltrans is investing billions of dollars statewide and locally, in part from new gas tax revenues, to repair and repave our highways and bridges, maintenance that is long overdue. Our two transportation agencies in San Bernardino and Riverside counties, SBCTA and RCTC, are also moving full speed ahead to deliver projects. Both are self-help counties in which our voters have approved half-cent sales taxes for transportation improvements. Combined, our agencies have collected and reinvested more than $6 billion in transportation projects and services during the past 30 years. Additionally, we have used those revenues to leverage state and federal funds to stretch our local dollars and deliver projects more efficiently, saving our taxpayers millions. Without a doubt, we have delivered on the promises made to our voters and have proven our fiscal responsibility, but more funding is needed. Riverside and San Bernardino counties are two of the fastest-growing counties in the United States. Our population grew by 48,000 people in just 1 year. This growth requires our agencies to be more proactive for our future, because this growth isn't going to slow down anytime soon. Our transportation investments today are mostly for yesterday's growth. However, our two agencies and Caltrans must continue to plan, design, and build for the population and economy of tomorrow. A well-performing transportation network will attract businesses to our region, which will reduce the need for our residents to commute to other counties and decrease the time they are stuck in traffic. Here's what we're doing in the region. From the mountains to the deserts, construction is in high gear. The Route 60 rehabilitation project is replacing 18 miles of pavement in both counties. Crews are building the Redlands Passenger Rail Project, a 9-mile system from San Bernardino to Redlands. Construction is underway on 15 miles of the I-15 express lanes in Jurupa Valley, Eastvale, Norco, and Corona. Through a funding partnership and Senate Bill 132, the County of Riverside widened and recently opened the I-15 Limonite interchange in Eastvale and Jurupa Valley. Emergency repairs are continuing on Routes 74 and 243, leading to the Idlewild and Mountain Center communities, with both routes now open. Early work is occurring on 10 miles of the I-10 express lanes between Montclair and Ontario. Reconstruction of interchanges on I-15 in Victorville at E Street, D Street, Stoddard Wells, and widening the Mojave River Bridge is taking place. Construction of the 13-mile Route 58 Kramer Junction Expressway is continuing near the Kern County-San Bernardino County line. And work started this spring on the Route 60 Truck Lanes project, a 4.5-mile widening between Moreno Valley and Beaumont. Throughout this work, our strong partnership with the California Highway Patrol keeps our workers and motorists safe. We couldn't do this without them. In addition, while we are building for today, we continue to innovate for tomorrow. Last month, SBCTA signed a contract for the development, manufacturing, and testing of America's first self-contained zero-emission passenger rail vehicle. It's clear that the Inland Empire is focused on delivering transportation relief. Thank you for your support.
So what you noticed in that video is there's a wide array of projects that we're focused on both in Riverside and San Bernardino counties. Freight is a big component of what we have to address. A lot of the goods that are received in the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles actually are shipped out along the 60 and the 10 freeway to manufacturing, warehousing, and distribution centers in Ontario, in Chino, in Fontana and Rancho Cucamonga, a little bit in Rialto, and out here in San Bernardino, the city of San Bernardino proper. And so that adds to some of the issues we have, both from an air quality perspective as well as congestion. The other big issue that we have is we are basically the bedroom community for Southern California. Both counties provide much more affordable housing in the region than you can find in Los Angeles and Orange counties. And so we've got the added pressure of the commute traffic. And so our solution is not just looking at freeway expansion, it's not just looking at arterial and interchange expansion, although those are all very important, but it's also trying to encourage people to mode shift. And that's what you saw at a couple of places in there, the rail investment that's ongoing, particularly right now here in San Bernardino County. And I think the most exciting part of that is our focus on trying to help clean up the air and bring a new mode or a new energy source to passenger rail. The zero-emission passenger rail vehicle you saw at the very end there is the first attempt in North America to bring that technology here. Now, Americans are proud to be innovators, but in this case, we're sort of cobbling together technologies that are already being used in Britain and in Germany and Switzerland, but bringing those technologies here. And we're doing all of these things, again, because we can't pave over the entirety of our two counties. So we've got to start to find new strategies to allow for freight movement, because that's not going to change in the near future. So we've got to accommodate that, but we've got to find ways to get commuter traffic out of the way. And so we're really, really focusing on the transit element to try to accomplish that. We need as much help, though, as possible, because we still have a lot of needs. We've got a lot of interchange needs. We've got some widening on both Interstate 10 and Interstate 15 that are necessary to continue to ensure the economic viability of the region. Thank you, Mike.
So you thought you were done. No, I'm not done. Just wanted to point out we are starting a what's called the Truck Parking Availability System project in District 8. It's a project on Interstate 10, which FHWA is funding, in which it's a real-time truck parking information will be presented. And so the hope is that, well, I guess that it will allow freight movement to be more efficient and safer. And we hope to have our project implemented by 2023, and of the 37 locations, 6 are located in District 8. Also, for anybody that has seen me speak, I always take an opportunity to present a safety message. Our staff are out there working hard to try and keep everything operating and maintained. And so we rolled out a campaign this past summer, and the message of the kids to be work zone alert, and I'll play it in a minute, but I just wanted to point out that these 2 employees, Michael Barrios, it's his grandchildren are in it, and David Mikado, his children are in this. It's a brief 30-second.
My mama.
My dad.
Our grandpa.
My daddy.
Our dad works at Caltrans.
Right on the highway.
Right next to speeding cars.
It's so scary. I worry about her.
Some people drive so fast.
Bam, bam, bam.
Please.
Please be careful. At least slow down.
And move over.
Please move over when you see flashing lights ahead.
Flashing amber lights ahead means move over.
Pretty powerful message when it's told by the children of our workers, and they understand the dangers that their parents are involved in every day. just added a slide with what we call near misses. And we define near misses as no serious injury. But if you look at some of the damage of these vehicles, it's almost a miracle nobody got seriously injured. So I tell my staff, my worst nightmare is to have to go to one of their families and tell them that their loved one's not going to ever come back. So my request is that when you're driving through a work zone, slow down, don't answer your cell phone, don't look for text. You know, that can wait till you get to your destination. It's very important that we always consider the safety of our workers. This slide basically shows our freight routes through District 8. A couple weeks ago, I was going through some project documents, and one of our plans out between Indio and Blythe, if you've driven out there, it's AC pavement. We're proposing what we call a white topping, and that's where you kind of do a thin mill on the AC, maybe a quarter to a half inch, and then you put 8 to 10 inches of PCC pavement on there. And I asked our staff, I go, why are we proposing this on I-10? And they pointed out that on this section of Interstate 10, 51% of the traffic is truck traffic. And if you've driven it, and my other son went to ASU, so I drove it plenty of times, you realize there is a lot of truck traffic out there, and this should help us, give us a 40, 50-year pavement life. Before I speak to a group, I try and find out a little bit about the group, so I went through your charter, and I was pleased to see that one of the top goals is to make recommendations to improve the statewide freight transportation system to address impacts of the system on neighboring communities, improve air quality, and reduce greenhouse gases. So I want to thank you for that. I mean, our residents of District 8, are greatly impacted by freight movement, and anything that you do here, innovative, that helps the quality of life, thank you. With that, I wanted to point out we have our freight planning liaison here, Riley Keller. Stand up if you have any questions about our freight plan in District 8. Riley's the person to contact, and his contact information's up here, either his phone number, or you can send him an email or catch him at break. With that, I guess I would ask Ray if you have anything else you want to say.
Just in closing, I want to thank all of the staff at District 8. I want to thank Caltrans. I want to thank District Director Mike Beauchamp. We have a unique partnership here in the Inland Empire, and I know that my counterpart in Riverside County and Mayor would share the same sentiments. We work very closely together toward a common goal, and so I appreciate everything that you guys do to help us to deliver the projects and commitments we've made to the voters in our county, and I know Ann would say the same, so thank you.
And thank you, and it takes a really strong partnership. With that, are there any questions? If not, thank you very much.
So thank you, Ray and Mike. We're going to transition right now back and really start talking about the meat of the California Freight Mobility Plan. We're going to have Yachtman, and you're going to cover this for us.
I will. Thank you, Dave.
I'll step aside.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at Cal State San Bernardino. Before I start, I really want to express my appreciation for all our members here at CFAC for your contribution to the CFMP, or Freight Mobility Plan. Of course, we cannot do this without you, and so we really value all the input you provided for our last 2 years of the freight plan development. So here we are at the draft, and for a start, I am going to go over chapters 1 to 5. There are 6 chapters in the CFMP, and we will discuss chapter 6 in a later agenda item, which predominantly deal with project lists as well as implementation. So how do we get here? Because of you, our CFAC members, as well as our outreach, we had, as you see here, we had a number of 7 CFAC meetings to get your input. as well as a number of subcommittees to very hone into specific topics. For example, we had the investment subcommittee, we had a scenario subcommittee. Again, we really, because of this, all your input provided really help us build the CFMP. So first off, there is executive summary, which is typical executive summary. We did outline the entire CFMP, the vision, the background, as well as how it's consistent with our other state freight plans. There is a Sustainable Freight Action Plan. There is the California Transportation Plan, as well as our ITSP, which is the Interregional Transportation Strategic Plan. So we highlighted how we are consistent with our other Caltrans efforts as well as other state efforts. This section also breaks down the 7 goals that we or 6 goals we have, 7 goals, as well as 6 chapters of what CFMPs consist of. Again, the goals, thank you for CFAC, because the goals are developed by you guys. So chapter 1. So chapter 1 goes over the vision, goals, and the high-level objectives of what the CFMP is. The CFMP, again, consistent with the other state plans that we have. We are also consistent with federal requirements of developing a state freight plan under FAST Act, as well as State AB 14. We identify California's significant freight system trends, needs, and issues. We also talk about what are the specific goals and objectives of each of the goals highlighted in the CFMP. Again, CFMP will be, as we aim for federal compliance, and there is going to be some project information as part of the freight plan, again, because to meet federal requirements. Chapter 2, we talked about how California is really doing in terms of freight and its competitiveness. So we talked about business locations, we talked about what we produce, where we produce it, and of course in this region we have a large number of distribution centers that are spread out all across California, but again, in this region there's a significant amount. We also have incredible valuable assets. We have our Port of LA, Long Beach, Oakland, as well as other ports, marine ports, as well as air cargo business. We do have a lot of that happening in California as well. Of course, there is, we are very honest in the freight plan that there is some input regarding California can and have some costs. It's typically higher than other states operating business. We are talking about how it compares to other states. We also talked about, again, labor, energy, all those additional costs that, again, is resonant throughout the freight industry in terms of their input, how and what they see are competitive disadvantages or even advantages in many ways of how California's freight is competing against other regions within the nation. We also touched upon performance assessment. It's also a key factor in terms of how are we doing in terms of performance on our system, infrastructure-wise, as well as our other assets. Again, labor, energy, and where we're going with this, with our freight industry. A lot more of this is built upon an appendix that we have extensive review of how we're doing in a more elaborate form, talking about costs and labor, again, challenges that we experience through freight. And this goes into chapter 3, goes into freight assets. We do have, again, I mentioned there is a number of freight assets. We have a number of border crosses in Mexico. We have significant number of pipeline, warehousing, distribution, seaports, airports. All those really, really build the foundation of our freight system in California. We have freight movement assessment measures, talking about how we're doing in other performance measures, federal as well as how we're doing compared, for example, asset management. And chapter 4 goes into the trends and future of freight. So since the last plan, there has been a lot of changes in California. We have, again, Sustainable Freight Action Plan. We have a robust increase of e-commerce. And again, this district really resonates the need to have this kind of infrastructure available. Again, there is not a lot more last mile, first mile deliveries than 5 years ago. And so Future of Freight really talks about what's happening with the changes in freight and what we should anticipate going forward for investments. So again, as I mentioned, e-commerce, there is more 3D printing available, drone deliveries. I think some of the regions, especially in the San Diego region, they're testing out drone deliveries for freight, especially for medical pharmaceuticals. And automation, automation with the infrastructure, automation with the vehicles, warehouse automation. And again, we also highlight the issues or potential issues. Automation may speak to different kinds of jobs. Automation may allow for cleaner energy, cleaner capacity. There's also other labor laws that influence how freight and freight-related industries work, as well as emission regulations. California has done a tremendous job of improving air quality. Again, really support the notion that we really need to move towards a sustainable freight future, cleaner energy, cleaner trucks, cleaner infrastructure. And opportunities, as I mentioned, the Port of LA Long Beach are doing a great job of but are improving with cleaner trucks access. There's infrastructure available, as well as, again, just the fact that we are looking towards that future. Caltrans, as well as other partners, really needs to include this infrastructure in our facilities. Again, we are doing a great job with some parking rides we're having with EV charging, but I think we could do a little more for our larger vehicles, again, the bigger trucks or class 3, class 4, class 5s. So again, those are opportunities available, and I think those are really going to stress that we really need to work together to move towards that vision. It also talks about the different types of commodities and flows coming in and out of California for different nations from within California, around California. And so this speaks to the 2015 information of what is happening to commodity and value and weight for freight. But it also projects to 2045. We talk about what kind of commodities are anticipated to come into California and what are the values of those goods. We do import a lot of electronics. We do import a lot of textiles. Again, how is that going to change from 2015 to 2045? Again, I think freight is so dynamic, and I do understand that 2045 is a very long time from now, but we are projecting the best we can with the valuable information that we have. Again, nobody expected an iPhone is going to change how we consume, and that was 10 years ago. And so 2045, it's 25 years from now, and things will change. And chapter 5, so the environmental challenges, opportunities, and engagement. One of the things that we're really, really, really proud of is that for this freight plan, we truly did a robust outreach effort and engagement effort. We have been going to public meetings, or we have been going to community meetings where people were there and we're talking to them rather than asking them to come to our venues. And I think those are going to the where communities are impacted by freight really speaks to listening, engaging with the audience. One good example is that we went to Wilmington, and Wilmington has a lot of freight. And we went to a Ciclavia event where there's a lot of community participation, and we got valuable input in terms of what they see freight, how they interact with freight, and opportunities of freight. We also went to an AB 617 event in San Diego. We had focus groups across the state. We had Native American listening sessions. We also engaged with interviews as well as freight stakeholders in terms of what they see are the opportunities, challenges within California's freight system. We also understand that freight can have environmental impacts, but again, I want to stress that from the 2014 plan, we have made significant progress in terms of improving our air quality, our health, as well as just generally the freight has gotten significantly cleaner and reducing our impact to the communities. One of the things we want to highlight here from the partnership that we did, we highlighted 5 key themes. These 5 key themes are competitiveness, technology, workforce, environmental impacts, and projects. And these themes are really what our audience or engagement partners really spoke of as concerns in terms of how California competes, technology implications, again, automation is one of them, workforce, with the new restriction or limitation in terms of how long truckers could drive, workforce isn't a problem. Also, too, workforce in an empire, maybe not enough workers with the skills. And with the slew of truck drivers retiring, there is a significant more demand for truck drivers. Environmental impacts, of course, this is always a very important theme in any freight. Again, how we are going to address environmental impacts, as well as, what are we making in terms of progress? What are some state initiatives? What are some local initiatives? And lastly, projects. Despite the fact that we have a significant luxury of having SB1 with very freight-focused money, there's significantly more we can do. There's significantly more need. And I think Mike really spoke to that, Ray Wolf really spoke to that. There's a lot of freight moving across California, and there's a lot more need for projects. And projects here really speaks to there's just so much going on that we need more money. Some key coming dates. As you know, the CFAC or CFMP is currently out in public circulation, and we really appreciate your input and comments. Those comments will be due at the end of January this month. We are also working with our CSMP interagency team, which is the California Sustainable Freight Action Plan team, to work with them for comments. One of the things that we're really looking forward to is the commission meeting on the 30th. Again, this is where we're going to get CTC commissioners' comments, as well as staff comments, and as well as the public comments in terms of their perspective and feedback on what the freight plan is. We anticipate that we're going to finalize this freight plan at the CTC meeting in March. And after it's finalized, we will submit the freight plan to the appropriate government bodies. So with that said, please, if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Sorry.
I've got one.
Sure.
Follow protocol. Sorry, right behind you somewhere. All right, thank you. So my staff and I went through the draft plan, and particularly focused on the project list. And I had some concerns. We have 2 projects that are identified in that project. We have more than 2, but 2 of them that are express lanes projects. And those projects were only marked in 2 of the 7 categories, right? And so presumably that means that they're not a high priority focus for trade corridors enhancement program funding or solutions for congested corridors program funding going forward. But when I did a full review of the entire project list, there are 9 express lanes projects in the Bay Area that received between 4 and I believe 6 marks. And so I raised a concern through the district, the local district here, that there needs to be equity in how we're looking at these projects. And so I hope at the headquarters level, at the state level, that you'll go back and take a look at this, because the project descriptions for all 11 projects are very similar. And so I don't see how someone who's actually scoring these could score projects in San Bernardino County so much lower than projects in the Bay Area, especially when I don't think anybody in this group would refute the claim that I'm going to make, and that is that most of the freight movement impacts are here in the Inland Empire, are here in Southern California, because of the movement of goods through the ports of both Los Angeles and Long Beach, the 3rd largest ports in the country. So I just want to highlight that that's a problem, and I know this is a draft, but I think, and I don't know if there's disparity in the marks on other types of projects. This is the one that I focus my energies on, so thank you.
Okay, so we are going to talk a little bit, that's the next agenda topic we have, is really to talk about project list methodologies. We recognize that, and that's one of the things that we're doing, cross-checking and cross-referencing as we get to a final plan, is comparing like projects as we went through that marking the goals and stuff, and trying to make sure there's some consistency across there. It's hard from looking at a project list of 200 and some projects with, an 8-word description, and comparing those project benefits to other project benefits when that's what you see in that spreadsheet, when there's more information behind the scenes. We are taking input, and that's part of this comment period, to take a look at that and take the input. We don't want to get in the individual discussions today, but we do want to get that feedback over the course of this month on what some of the regions feel, if they feel that, their goals aren't marked. Now, whether a project has 2 marks or 6 marks, that doesn't necessarily reflect the merit of the project, especially when you look to a specific funding program, because it's not only the TC EP that could potentially fund this project, but there's going to be other funding sources out there, and those projects are going to compete on basically that full project application. So just checking the number of goals that it meets on this doesn't necessarily reflect how it's going to rank in a project selection process. But we will be taking that feedback, and we encourage that feedback coming back where a region feels like there's been some disproportionate evaluation there.
Good morning. This is Allison Yo, Port of Long Beach. I admit I have not read through the entirety of the plan yet, but I think looking at your slides and the overview, I think setting up the plan to the extent that the CFMP has a federal audience as well, I think it's important to point out that California has 3 of the nation's 17 strategic seaports. And this is part of the National Port Readiness Network that provides a national service in terms of military deployment or humanitarian aid efforts. And I think it's important to highlight that as one of California's assets. It's in the Port of Long Beach, it's with Oakland, and also with San Diego.
Any other questions? All right, thank you, everyone.
Okay, now we're going to transition to the other part of the freight mobility plan when we talk about the next chapter of the plan, where we actually talk about the project list methodology. So presenting on this topic, we will have, it's going to be you and Nieves, right? Yeah. So it's going to be Yachtman, Nieves Castro, Avital Barnea, and myself. So we'll get set up here and get started on this topic. We're going to need another chair. You'll stand. Yeah, okay.
This. You'll just put this over there for you.
Great, thank you. So as we transition to chapter 6B, well, it's not 6B, but it's the project list methodology. And so we are, again, as Dave mentioned, we are going to tag team this between the 4 of us. And before we start going to what we've done in 2020, sorry about that. I want to give an overview in terms of what we've done in the 2014 plan. I think this really gives a history and background in terms of how we came to the 2020 process. And again, for most of us here at Caltrans, the 14 plan it really paved the way in terms of how we're applying for freight. And again, touching upon the 14 plan, what we've done was really highlight the 6 goals here. Similar to, we dive into the approach, similar with CFAC, we're looking for project information. And the 6 goals here, the economic competitiveness, safety, freight system infrastructure preservation, environment, congestion, as well as innovation technology and practices, they're very similar to the goals that we highlighted in the 2020 CFMP. Again, this is really, the 2020 CFMP really builds upon the 14 plan. So in the 14 plan, we have a total of 707 projects with approximately $138 billion worth of projects. We also use a tier approach, and tier approach really reflects MAP 21. We have a project time frame, which we sort of projects by, the short term, the immediate to 3 years, the immediate terms for 10 years, and long term, which is 10 plus years. Again, we really, because it was building off map 21, we have network types. So we have the primary freight network, the national freight network, as well as it came into where the project divided into the 4 project types: system preservation, operation and management, community environment stewardship, as well as capacity enhancement. Again, there's also too, the projects are also further divided by 6 broad categories: maintaining and enhancing our assets, new technology and practices, addressing negative impacts from freight, strategically adding new capacity, strengthening the collaborative approach, create dedicated and feasible, reliable long-term freight funding programs, which I think we were very successful at. And they're also further divided by 5 geographic contexts: gateway, corridors, last mile, connectors, hubs, and broader initiatives. And those include ITS projects, the technology projects. And this is the result. We have 707 projects that are divided in such a way where it highlighted which type of project it is. For example, again, let's use the one in Alameda. It's a capacity enhancement project. It meets the 4 goals of the 2014 plan. It is on a corridor, tier 1, and it's a primary corridor as well. And we have a medium term for this project. And so this is how the layout was done for the 14 plan. So Nieves will get into the progress since we made since 14.
Yeah, go to
sorry.
that last one.
Okay, my apologies. So, okay, I'm going to kick this off to progress since the 14 plan. So, as I mentioned in the earlier presentation, we have made significant progress in 14. Things are just changing really quickly. And with FAST Act, it definitely replaced MAP 21 and its requirements of how we do freight planning. We also have an incredible effort of Sustainable Freight Action Plan in California. Now, again, this is a joint effort. This is not a Caltrans document. This is a state document where we partner with our local agents, well, our state partners with the ARB, the CEC, for public utilities, as well as our governor's office. And so with that plan, action plan, we are enabling how we are moving towards a sustainable freight future. Again, making it cleaner, promoting job growth, increasing funding, grant programs. And that, again, Sustainable Freight Action Plan really is one of the bases for the 2020 freight plan. And lastly, we have SB1. Okay, SB1 provided dedicated funding for freight. And it really speaks to the need for freight and how we're meeting those needs with money.
Okay, thanks, Yamin. So switching gears, we can talk about the CFMP project list. This is really the Chapter 6 of the 2020 CFMP. So with all the progress we've made since 2014, we want to make sure that the project list that we're developing reflects the important changes that Yamin just highlighted. So working with CFAC and the CFAC Investment Subcommittee, we met a number of times to get your feedback and comments regarding our project list methodology. So to summarize, we did a call for projects in early 2019. We received 1,248 projects. To ensure that there's a better storytelling aspect of these projects, we focused on developing regional freight investment strategies. Building upon the CSFAP, we want to see the projects that steer towards a cleaner freight future, preserving our competitiveness, environment, and communities. In addition, we developed 4 state themes: improving port access reliability, border efficiency, inter- and intrastate freight movement, and resiliency, sustainability, and innovation. Our original intent was to develop a state priority project list. However, we heard your feedback at the September CFAC, and we revised our methodology. Next slide, please. As a reminder, these are the 7 regions that we developed in partnership with our CFAC members. I think everyone's pretty much familiar with that. So, next slide.
Is this me? All right. So thank you, everybody. Can you hear me? Thank you for your continued contributions to the project list. As you can see, we're really trying to put in some effort to make sure we're getting the project methodology right. And just a reminder of what the California Freight Mobility Plan is. And this is really the state's vision for freight and for the future of freight. With the TSEP program around the corner, there's a natural assumption that the CFMP is tied to the TSEP, but really the CFMP is not tied to any specific funding sources. And when various discretionary funding opportunities arise, we will utilize the CFMP as one of the many planning resources with our partners to go after funding for projects that best meet the objectives of those notice of funding opportunities. For example, TSEP guidelines just came out, and there are some changes from what you saw last year. In my previous career, I worked on the infra and build grant programs, and those project considerations can change every year depending on the authority of the administration or what Congress has put into the appropriation for that program. And so I would say really the only thing that is consistent is that notice of funding opportunities may change as they evolve. And so again, the CFMP is not tied directly to the TSEP or any other funding sources. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dave.
Yeah, so, and not only do the funding opportunities evolve and change over time, but when we have to recognize that projects evolve and change over time too, especially as we try to make those projects fit certain funding programs or change those projects to fit other funding programs, or as priorities change or conditions change out there. So that's one of the themes that we have on this is we've developed a project list, we have a 5-year plan, but really we're committed to coming back here at CFAC and trying to figure out a way on how we should keep a living list of projects so that list of projects doesn't go stale over the period of the 5 years, or the project information contained in that list may get out of date. So we're committed to come back to CFAC and collectively decide how and when we should update that list and what that process will look like. So as we finalize this plan, that's our goal, is to come back and have that discussion and work towards a way and a process to update that list. Today, and part of this effort is really, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, the purpose of this is to get your feedback on this approach. It's a little bit of a different approach, you know, as we assess the projects and kind of look at their alignment with each of the goals. So we want to get your feedback on that. We didn't want to get into discussions today about individual projects, but if there are cases where you think your project alignment is not correct or is not consistent with other similar projects out there, please provide that feedback to us during this month of the comment period so we could take a closer look at that and make some adjustments if necessary. You know, so we're hoping as we walk away here from today that we could get that feedback on how you feel that evaluation looking at that goal alignment. Okay.
So as part of developing the 7 regions, we asked regions and districts for their priority projects that were construction ready by 2025. As a result of that, we ended up with 362 projects. For the 2020 list of the 362 projects, we did a qualitative assessment on how each project aligned with the 7 CFMP goals. And I want to emphasize and reiterate that this is based on the project information that we have. So as Dave mentioned, we are open to if there's more information that we haven't considered. The assessments were done by Caltrans headquarters as well as working with our Caltrans districts. We do recognize that some regions have more projects than others, and that's a reflection of the unique characteristics and context of those regions. Regions such as the Bay Area and the LA Inland Empire have a number of maritime ports, while the San Diego border region has significant freight movement between California and Mexico. Next slide, Yatman.
Yes.
So as a reminder, these are the 7 goals as well as their description. Next slide, please. So I won't go through each one of these, but this is essentially what we used when we did the alignment assessment. These goals were developed in partnership with CFAC, and this information is also available in your folders. Next slide, please. So this is a summary of the projects we received, of the 362 projects. A breakdown of the project types are as follows. Grade separations, we received 25 of them. That's 7% of the projects. 45 rail, 7 port access. And lastly, there are 202 projects that are interstate truck movement, essentially highway projects. Next slide, please. So these are the projects by region. So most to least, the Bay Area, we received 110. LA Inland Empire 93, Central Valley 68, San Diego Border 53, Central Coast 24, Northern California 8, and Central Sierra 6 projects. Next slide, please. So this chart shows the number of projects with the number of goals aligned. Of the 362 projects, all projects were aligned with at least 2 goals. A majority of the projects were aligned with 5 and 6 goals. So, for example, 18 projects aligned with at least 2, 26 projects aligned with 3, and so forth. Last slide, please. Lastly, we looked into the alignment across the regions. In this slide, you'll see the percentage of composition of the number of goals within each region. For example, for the Bay Area, 24.55% of the projects within the Bay Area aligned with 6 goals. And this is pretty consistent with the previous slides where most projects align with 5 to 6 goals. So with that, are there any questions? Carrie?
So similar to Dr. Wolf's comments on the inconsistency of the express lanes, Ports Rail system, this is just more of a correction that we'll provide, is that several of the rail projects, most of the rail projects had all the categories identified, and certainly the 2 environmental related categories. Ports Rail system is a system as a whole. All the projects interrelated as one system, and they all reduce truck trips on the roadway system. So they obviously have the enhancements to the healthy communities and emission reductions. And so we'll make sure we get that corrected in our rail access projects.
Sounds good. Alyssa?
Thank you, Nieves. Similar comment. We have some comments on the Lausanne Rail Corridor projects for consistency, and others on managed lanes and environmental benefits of some of the projects that we feel we can provide some information to you all to consider.
Sounds good. I fully expected this feedback.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, good morning. Maura Toomey from the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments and also the Central Coast Coalition and the Rural Counties Task Force wasn't able to make it today, and she asked me to pass along a couple comments. These are from her, and so I just wanted to couch that.
CTC comments.
Yeah. Anyway, so the Central Coast agencies and the rural counties are concerned with the project list methodology, and they're also concerned that the ratings lacked coherent criteria and decisions made without adequate information or input from the regions. And so maybe, hopefully Maura could follow up. I think she may be listening in, but she could follow up with you guys to express her concerns a little bit further.
Okay, that's the similar theme for the last 3, so thank you. Thank you, Maura, for your listening.
Kenneth Cow, MTC. Maybe I needed a little bit more clarification from Caltrans on, this list. I know earlier you had a list of 20 projects, and then now this is a little bit more broad, so I appreciate that. But how does Caltrans plan to use this list as it relates to supporting projects for the TCEP program?
I'll take a shot and then I'll turn it over to Dave. I think I would consider this a consideration, one of many. I mean, there's obviously the criteria that's associated with the TSEP program itself. Additional specificity, I would defer to Dave.
Okay, I would say this is just one thing. If you look at it, what Caltrans is going to consider for their support of projects out there and looking for statewide participation or nomination from Caltrans, we're going to be looking at those projects really in depth and in whole. And that's where I say some of those projects where it's not going to be the number of goals that are check marked here. It's going to be looking at the project. We're going to be requiring our districts to provide project fact sheets with detailed information to help us gauge and compare those projects to each other, a much more in-depth look than what we're showing here in this plan. And quite frankly, part of that's going to be looking at and deciphering through those guidelines for the TCEP program and looking specifically of which projects we think fit in with those guidelines the best as well too, which may be different than just like I said, the number of goals here that we say are in alignment and that kind of thing.
One other thing that the department is looking at is true partnership and meeting funding partnership, not just a letter of supporters. So that's a conversation we intend to start having over the next few weeks in preparation for the call.
I'll just add on that too. I know it can be easy to look at the list and be concerned if your project only checks off a couple of the goals that are in the plan. But really that's just looking at how do these projects align with the plan, and all of this is a draft. The plan is still a draft, the project list is still a draft, and so if you have any comments on what those goals are, or if you think the alignment is not correct, please let us know through the public comment period. And again, with grant programs, it's not just whether or not the project aligns with the goals. There are considerations like benefit cost analysis, geographic diversity, matching funds, and other things like that. So, this isn't like an end-all be-all for your project and how it will be rated in a grant program.
Laurel.
Hi, Laurel Luna from RCTC. I haven't had a chance to review all of these, the entire plan, but so far from what I've seen, it's actually very thorough. So I think you guys did a very good job with that. In terms of the project list, though, I know there was some back and forth initially when there were some drafts of the project list that were provided, and there were some revisions that we provided as well. But I was wondering if you can kind of better explain to us how the cutoff of only listing the projects of what would be ready for construction by 2025, why that is, because the CFMP itself, the planning horizon for that is more long-term than just the next 5 years. There are, at least in our county and Riverside County, I think we'll be taking a look at the list more in depth, but I think there will be more projects that we'd like to add under the rail systems, which it may not meet the 2025 criteria, but I'm just curious about the 2025 criteria.
Yeah, so that we've heard that comment or similar comments to that, and that's kind of where we wanted to go with the discussion of how do we keep this as a living list and how do we continue to update that, and recognizing that as we get towards the end of this 5-year plan, there's going to be other projects that are going to be within that time frame of wanting to go to construction, and that's why we're going to engage and have that conversation about basically about adding projects to the list. And so maybe as a year falls off, you add another year out there. So you're looking at, what's ready to go in the next 4 to 5 years, and really where those priorities, and we recognize they're going to shift and stuff, but that's part of having that conversation. Yeah, it is a planning document, but focusing in on those projects that are deliverable in the next 5 years we get a better idea of those projects, and some of those projects evolve over time. If you get a project that's over 5 years, you're either haven't started the environmental stage or fairly early in the environmental stage, and those projects could change. So it is a discussion we're having, and that criteria may change as we have those discussions. When we go to update the list, maybe we decide that RTL of a 5-year window should be adjusted, or maybe there should be other criteria of how we get that list to a contained number, but still robust list and still meeting the needs of the different regions out there. So I know that really doesn't really answer your question, but that is some of the stuff that we're taking forward, trying to figure out how to incorporate that into the future, and then how to update that list as projects do move forward and get closer to being able to go to construction.
The other thing I'll add to that is it's also important to have that conversation as we try to move towards transformative projects, projects that need to get into project delivery. So that will be part of our subsequent conversations as we update the list.
Good morning, Michael Connell, Los Angeles Metro. Thank you, of course, for all the work, and I really enjoyed reading through. It was a good read over the holidays. I've noticed in here that the focus on zero emission technology seems to be more located, location based. So if the ports have electrification, projects, for example, then that's in here. But in terms of your assessment of components of projects like the 710 South, which has a clean truck program component that was in the EIR, that's not an infrastructure based primarily. There could be infrastructure elements, but it's mostly a conversion of technology, or maybe ITS elements that are embedded in projects. Is there a way to break that out or to provide it its own element here? Because those might be standalone projects, given that these multi-component projects are probably going to be broken up into different components for different funding opportunities because of just the complexity of the project. So if we wanted to, put together a coalition, which we are doing, to see about, either what the ports are doing for their clean truck program or what we're trying to do at Metro in terms of a regional clean truck program, how does that get picked up in this? Because it would be within the 2025 framework. It would tick off multiple boxes, and it would be, meeting some of the goals here that we think would be important to articulate.
So in the freight plan on Chapter 6B, there are a number of project types that we as a state are very supportive of, that are consistent with the Sustainable Freight Action Plan. And your clean truck corridors, as well as infrastructure, along with modal ship projects, along with ITS, those are projects that the state really sees the freight future of moving towards. Specific projects like electrification or programs can also be included in a project list, which I think Kenneth did in his projects list. So we do welcome programs as well, again, because we want to be fair and cognizant of all the districts and regions' needs. However, again, we are, as a state, in our CFMP, does mention that we are supportive of those clean energy freight projects. Gary?
Yeah, just a similar comment made about the list of projects. I would recommend actually having an appendix of sort of the long-term, the post-2025 projects. So I believe the complete list had been sent to Caltrans initially. And so you do have that information, or we could refurnish that from the various regions.
Alyssa?
Oh.
Oh, okay.
Any additional comments? Oh.
Okay, we happen to be well ahead of schedule somehow, Yatman, you did that. Oh. That's okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Maris. Yeah, I also enjoyed reading the the document. It was a lot of change from the original document. I was just curious, first of all, did the writing go from the consultants over to Caltrans and Caltrans did the rewrite? Is that what happened?
So as you guys may know, so originally the CFMP had a consultant on board, and we worked with consultants. We actually worked together even in the early stages of development. So it wasn't just a consultant writing it, it was Caltrans and consultant. We are, of course, as CFMP evolved, we did write substantially more content to support what we need. And so it is a joint effort, but near end leg of it, Caltrans did include a lot more information.
The answer is yes.
Yeah, it reads that way, and I like the improvements. Thank you. Secondly, on the economic prosperity goal, how do you define that? I mean, there are a lot of projects that are checked off, some small projects, some larger, more transformative. But do you have a metric that says how you define that?
Well,
I see the words,
right.
but I don't see any metrics that indicate how you measure it, how you define it necessarily. I was just curious.
Let me take a shot. Okay. So essentially, all of the methodology alignment assessment was done qualitatively. We don't have any metrics for any of the goals. I don't know if Rusty, sitting over there in the back, he's the one who actually did the alignment. So I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Economic prosperity was a difficult one. These were, all of the projects were looked at several different ways. When I did economic prosperity the first time, I basically focused on the ports, thinking, okay, what's creating new jobs? But then we regrouped, looked at it again. Then it was like, okay, what, subjectively, if you narrow down on something, you can be real focused and sort of only these few projects, you know, are aligned to a certain goal. But then as you sort of grow that how you're looking at it, then we started like, well, is there any economic prosperity with any sort of freight? If it's a grade crossing, could there be economic prosperity there? And so in those cases, yeah, so we started maybe checking off more of those boxes. So how this worked, I went through it a couple of times, and then we worked with our districts, and they also went through it as well. So it is a sort of a amalgamation of, you know, opinions. They looked at this description, and then it was scored there. So now I think this is a good opportunity. It goes out to everyone who knows more about the projects, can provide more information, and then provide us better feedback on each project.
So I think one thing is really important to keep in mind is that this is a plan level document rather than a project level specific document. As we're looking into projects, I think it'll be very challenging of 362 that we have to ask and find out the appropriate economic metric for it. And to be honest, there isn't probably available data for every single project. But again, this is a very high level plan level view of what the goal is and description. However, again, when it comes to project application, when the NOFO comes, for example, if economic prosperity is one of the things we need to fill out, we are going to ask, how is it going to enhance economic prosperity?
Thank you. And
Metro, sorry.
I'm sorry. And also, finally, so when you look for transformative projects, there are samples of those here, and I think they're great projects. And the governor has one of his initiatives is Regions Rising, and you do mention that in the document. Thank you for doing that. But you also don't have any targets for regions. So I'm just curious how you align the governor's policy interest in Regions Rising with the project list, which ultimately I think that's where the rubber meets the road in terms of identifying how you implement policy. How do you get to having no regional targets? For example, the governor is very interested in the Inland Empire, very interested in San Joaquin Valley, Northern California. And the interest there is that these are historically the areas that have been left behind in terms of economic prosperity. And as you know, the governor wants a California for all, and therefore is very interested in these areas and bring them up economically. How does one look at this project list or this plan and determine, yes, this is a direction that supports that policy interest by the governor? That's probably my main question.
Let me take that one. Can we go back to the slide that shows all of the regions and the percentages?
Oh, percentages?
It was like the second to last slide, I think. So I think the short answer, and I know that we've been saying this, but there's no funding tied to this. You know, this is simply, we asked all of the partners, the regional partners, what are your freight priority projects over the next 5 years, which is the short-term life of this plan. This plan will be updated again in another 5 years. And they said, these are our projects that are going to be ready over the next 5 years. And we said, okay, great. We're going to analyze those projects according to the goals that we've identified in the CFMP. And if you look, one more, the bar chart, or two more maybe. Yeah, that one. I think if you look across the regions, it's actually, you know, pretty consistent. I don't think that any region looks like it's being left behind. You know, and maybe that you would even think that these results would be a little bit different than they are with some of the more urban areas, you know, having more projects. I think that it's, you know, pretty statistically similar across the different regions. And so I would say, you know, with this not being an investment strategy per se with no funding tied to it, we're certainly looking across the state. What are the projects that align with what we want to see for freight in the future? And I think that, you know, there are plenty in these areas that are of the governor's top interest. And so I think, you know, we are looking at that.
And how do you separate Inland Empire from the greater Southern California region? Because I see them lumped together.
Should we go to the map? Is that what you mean? Like, where are the boundaries?
Yeah, there's a, I forget which slide you have, but you have the percentages. You have Inland Empire plus Southern California.
Let's see.
I have to see which one that is.
Okay.
Is this?
I took a photo of it.
I'm going to defer that question to one of the Caltrans folks.
LA, Inland Empire, how do you differentiate?
Well, so we did work with the regions. So, for example, in this LA and Inland Empire, we worked with SCAG to various projects. Again, I think Avatar has mentioned that this is the projects that we have to the goals. I don't want to specifically highlight Inland Empire is more important or LA is more important. Again, it's more geographic in terms of consistency, in terms of what that region is. So again, we lumped the Imperial County with San Diego because the border regions have a very specific freight need compared to a different region in California.
And,
so,
yeah, and keep in mind, as projects compete for different funding sources, you know, some of those specific issues may come out and may get, you know, that may be criteria that gets looked at. Depend on the funding program, who's sponsoring the project, where they're going through, and that may separate out, you know, these regions were set up to kind of group and have the discussion. I will say one thing before we go to Ray here. When you look at this project list, 362 projects, it's a lot of projects. Every single one of these projects has a connection to freight. Every single one of these projects is important to the region of which they're in. Otherwise, we wouldn't be going through this effort, each of the regions and the Caltrans districts and stuff, of spending time and effort on starting to develop these projects and getting ready to go. They are important to those regions. We recognize every single one of those projects is important to the region that they fall into. So that's what makes, you know, projects list a tough discussion. But, you know, trying to make it clear today that, yes, we have a project list here that gives an idea of what the need is across for a 5-year freight plan. But, you know, that list is not necessarily connected to how projects are going to be evaluated with different funding priorities, because there are going to be specific criteria that get looked at. specific partnerships, the cost of a project versus, what kind of money that leverages from other programs, those kinds of, there's going to be those other activities that come into play. So I don't know if that helps, but I just want to clarify, my previous role as a district director in Caltrans, I could tell you, the projects that I see in my area, they're very important to me. And I think one only has 3 check marks checked, and I could probably argue all those check marks just like anybody else could argue the check marks on their projects, but we're just trying to give some qualitative evaluation and say, in general, it's just 362 projects in alignment with where we want to go with the plan. And the answer coming out of this evaluation is yes, they are in alignment of where we want to go with the plan. There definitely are things we want to push in the future to get them in more alignment, but in general, this whole collection of projects is in alignment with where we want to go with the development across California. Ray?
So Ray Wolf, just to briefly touch on, I think Frank brings up a really important point in that the distribution that's in the CFMP doesn't represent the governor's focus now with Regions Rise Together. And so I think it would be interesting, and I would ask that if you could just provide that information to break up this data. You've got the data set, and you can break it up into a format that's more consistent with the Regions Rise Together. And Dave, you're right? We all are fighting very hard for our respective regions because we think they're very important. And I'm not going to belabor the point, but I do think there needs to be equity in project types and how they're scored. And so I'll leave that alone. The last thing I want to comment on, Avital, you'd mentioned that there's no intent to tie this to a funding source. But I would argue that when you publish a list of projects and you've got an established statewide set of criteria and you grade those projects based on criteria, it will be used at some level for that purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael Connor, LA Metro. And it's interesting tension, building off this discussion and the previous discussions we've had is the focus on the regions that are not the most urban areas of LA or of the state, but then juxtaposed with the fact that in the Bay Area and in LA, for example, you have the ports, you have the tremendous generators of economic competitiveness for the state's economy, where if there's a lack of investment or a lack of focus there, the entire system clogs up or backs off and reduces in terms of the state's ability to generate its economy. So, I think it would be interesting to see how this plays out in terms of qualifying different projects, because there are projects that might help a region of California be competitive against regions in adjacent states, for example, in terms of keeping businesses. And there's projects that may keep freight in California that may otherwise go to another part of the country where we don't have any benefit from that. So I mean, there's different orders of magnitude, and there's also different causalities here in terms of, if there's a ripple effect as well. If there is a major problem from the ports leading out in terms of losing cargo because of a lack of competitiveness, because lack of infrastructure investment, then all the regions are going to feel it, not just the urban, but the inland areas and the areas that are identified by the governor as well. So I mean, I wouldn't like to see it be completely atomized in terms of, this group of counties and those groups of counties. I think there's got to be that interconnection between these counties and the jobs and the way the freight flows and where it generates and what kinds of competitiveness we're talking about. I don't want to lose that. I think you can qualify it in the applications. I think it can be part of the geographic equity or geographic discussion in terms of balance that will be in funding applications, but I think it's important to keep that. There's two sides of the same coin. I mean, we all rise together or we all fall together, and I think there's a concern that there are probably some projects in the port area in LA, especially, where if we don't get those fixed, then everything else deteriorates. But at the same time, you can't focus 100% of the investment there because there are needs in inland areas that are trying to raise their economic profiles too. So, as long as we keep discussing that balance and having more of a deep dive on that, I think the better it'll be in terms of how this plan informs funding opportunities in the future.
Any other questions out there? So as I was going to state a little bit ago, but we still are way ahead of schedule. So my suggestion here is we're going to take a quick 10-minute break, 10, 15-minute break, and we're going to see what we could do to rearrange the schedule and that, or, you know, we'll figure something out here. So let's get back here in, so we'll say 15 minutes, about 10:50.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, go ahead. Good morning. My name is Monica Gordine, and I am the Associate Division Administrator out of the Federal Highway California Division Los Angeles office. And it's a pleasure to be with you today. I have 3 items that I would like to discuss. The first is the National Freight Strategic Plan that is required by the U.S. DOT to implement as required by the FAST Act. There was a request for information that was issued in the Federal Register last month. And as a part of that, because of the FAST Act, one of the requirements was that we get input from our stakeholders into the input of the National Freight Strategic Plan. And in the request for information, there are 10 questions, and we hope that we can get your feedback on some of those 10 questions. To give you an idea what some of the questions are, there are things like, what are the key challenges facing the U.S. freight transportation system? And what approach should the federal government use to invest in multimodal freight system? And I put a one-pager, there's a one-pager I think on the table outside to give you some background on the purpose of the freight plan and some of the initiatives that we're trying to do. And I think the request for information, the end date is in February, so you've had about a month to address those questions, and we hope that we look forward to getting your input on that. The second thing I'd like to talk about is a grant program that we have here in Federal Highway. It's called the Advanced Transportation and Congestion Management Technologies Deployment Program, better known as ATCMTD. It's pretty long. And we've funded some projects here in California. Just to give you an idea, we funded Freightus through that program, and the call for FY20 projects is coming soon, and it will come after we announce the awards for the FY10. So there was an FY10 call last year, and they had not announced the projects that will be receiving money for that grant program. But once they announce those projects, the call for FY20 should be pending, coming pretty soon here, we hope. And then finally, for any of you who will be attending TRB next week, it's right around the corner. Wednesday morning, our Office of Freight Management will have a session in the morning of Wednesday morning, I think that's the 15th. And it will highlight a new tool that we have that we are going to publish here pretty soon that deals with the National Freight Network. So it's an interactive tool, a web tool-based technology, and we hope to demonstrate that next week at TRB. And that's all that I have, unless there are any questions.
Okay, I'll go next. Updates from CalSTA. So tomorrow, the governor's budget is due to the legislature, so we're anticipating that. And in advance of the budget release, you may have seen that yesterday Governor Newsom signed Executive Order 23-20, which focuses on the problem of homelessness. And that executive order highlights Caltrans' model lease template to allow local partners to use Caltrans properties near state highways and state roads and highways to be used for short-term emergency shelters. The executive order also creates the California Access to Housing and Services Fund, which will be part of an over $1 billion package to address homelessness and provide support services to people in need. So this just came out yesterday. This is new. We don't have a lot more to share on that right now, but letting you know that that was released yesterday. Next, the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program. Applications are due on January 16th at 5 p.m. That is for transit and passenger rail, but there are often overlaps between passenger rail and freight rail, so some of you may be involved in some of those applications as partners, and so just a reminder that that's due January 16th. There's going to be between $450 and $500 million available for that program. We're still calculating the amount based on the auction from Cap and Trade. And funding for that program will be announced April 1st. Also, a reminder on behalf of our partners at the DMV that the deadline to get your real ID is October 1st. So if you plan to fly in the near future, please make an appointment or head to your DMV to get your real ID. And then I also just want to thank CSU San Bernardino for hosting us and to Caltrans staff for all their work planning and facilitating this meeting and writing the CFMP.
Question.
Yeah, question. Oh, there's a question.
Right.
Yes.
I'll just speak up, Bob. I'm just curious. I read the governor's executive order yesterday, and I agree we got to do something. But maybe that's a step in the right direction. But I worry a lot of the state's right-of-way is adjacent to the highway facilities. And so from a safety perspective, I hope those aren't the areas that we're looking at allowing homeless populations for short periods of time even. And I realize the state has other areas that maybe are beneath bridges or somewhat separated, but working for Caltrans in the past, it's always been a concern of ours when you've got homeless populations. Now, in my role as one of the member agencies of Metrolink, it's a big problem for us. A lot of the strikes that we experience are because of homeless populations that are cropping up along the alignment, because it's an easy place for homeless people to sort of be out of the way and not be noticed as much. So I just thought that was interesting. And along the lines of the getting our new driver's license,
Yeah.
the DMV is now in better shape, I hope.
Yeah, we're working to make it better. They put kiosks in grocery stores. They have a new director, Steve Gordon. They're doing a lot of innovations. They're going to start taking credit cards soon. And so, yes, definitely moving forward at the DMV.
I've been waiting.
Do you have your real ID?
Not yet.
Okay.
Make an appointment.
On September 29th.
Oh, okay.
It's cutting it close. That's cutting it close, right?
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. My name's Garth Hopkins. I don't know, is this working?
It's not on.
It's not on? Okay,
Try
now
that.
it's working. Thank you very much. Again, my name's Garth Hopkins. I'm the Deputy Director of Transportation Planning at the California Transportation Commission. And up until last night, Don Chesser, who's our Deputy Director for Programming at the CTC, was planning on coming, but something came up, so she couldn't make it. So I'll try to do the best job I can in terms of briefing you all, in terms of where we're at with the 2020 Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, or TCIP, or TCEP, pick your acronym, the guidelines. So the guidelines will address the legislative requirements and incorporate input received from stakeholders. And there's been a total of 4 workshops so far, and there may be one more additional workshop. The 2020 TCEP program itself will provide 3 years of funding, starting with 2021, fiscal year 2021. And like I say, we've had 4 workshops so far since the kickoff in March of 2019. And the guidelines are being developed in consultation with ARB, Caltrans, regional agencies, and other interested stakeholders. So far, it seems like, based on the workshops, that the stakeholders are largely satisfied with the language that is in the current draft of the guidelines. And then the draft guidelines will be discussed at our January 29th and 30th California Transportation Commission meeting. And hopefully they will go before our commissioners for adoption in March as well, at the March CTC meeting. And with that, that's all I have, and hopefully you guys don't have too many technical questions on the TCIP program, because I probably won't be able to provide them, but I can pass them on to Don. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it, man.
So on page 12 of the guidelines.
Oh, yeah, I know that one. The middle of the paragraph, right? That's what you're talking about. Yeah, I know that.
So I raised this at the workshop, and Don and I came to agreement we're going to talk to DOT. I'm just going to raise the issue for this group in that we have all these wonderful projects, we have wonderful plans, we have a great SB1 funding source, but we still have difficulty linking this to the DOT programs, discretionary grant programs, with the infra specifically. We had a workaround last guidelines where we had language where, because there's two different schedules, TSEP's on a multi-year programming schedule, infra's on an annual schedule, Avatal knows all this, where we worked with DOT to come up with language where that if a grant was awarded from DOT that had TSEP money as part of the funding plan, that would be considered a guarantee from the CTC that yes, that money will be available, because we were told that, you know, obviously you can't have a risky funding plan, that, you know, if you have discretionary grant funding built into it, then that is risk if it's not that guarantee. If you don't have state money in it, then basically it's less competitive because they want to see multiple types of funding that's matching the federal investment. But also it's a horrible problem to have where if you have local money trying to match federal only with no state participation for a project of national significance, doesn't make any sense. So we just need to continue to find how do we make sure that if we have a good, strong project, maybe with the blessing of the state or something where we want to compete for federal funding against other states, that if there's TSEP that needs to be put on that project, how do we make sure it's available? I know the concern has been we don't want to presuppose the decisions of the CTC. We don't want to you know, have money that's already tied up for a project that might get this grant. You know, I understand all that. So we just need to keep working on that issue, because if we have parallel processes between TSEP and infra or whatever else comes out of it in the future, we're going to be less competitive than states that have the funding. Okay, if you get this grant, the money's there, you got local match, state match, and then we get the federal money, and then we have our major projects funded. And usually those projects that get funded at the infra level have support from the governor on down as a state priority. So that's something to think about when you develop this CFMP, the TSEP guidelines, and just in the future, keep that idea in mind, because we need to figure that out.
Good comment. Thank you. Quiet group.
Good morning, Nieves Castro, Caltrans. So Caltrans has completed the district climate change vulnerability assessments. The assessments highlight segments of the state highway system vulnerable to the impacts of sea level rise, storm surge, coastal erosion, changes in precipitation, increased heat, and flooding. Each of the districts received a summary and a technical report and an interactive online map showing locations of projected impact from climate change and extreme weather events. The results of the vulnerability assessments will be used in the development of district adaptation reports. On August 16th, 2019, Caltrans released the Sustainable Transportation Planning Grant Application Guide with an application deadline of October 17th, 2019. We've received 163 applications requesting approximately $49.4 million. That's nearly 3 times the available budget of $17 million. In addition, Caltrans received 15 strategic partnership grant applications that are requesting approximately $4.8 million, and $4.5 million is available. Grant announcements are anticipated in spring of 2020. In addition, Caltrans will be updating the Sustainable Transportation Planning Grant Guide and application for the 21-22 fiscal year, and will start the process this spring and released in July 2020. Caltrans is currently updating the Interregional Strategic Plan. The ITSP promotes the state of California's role of improving interregional mobility and providing opportunity for efficient goods movement while highlighting critical planning considerations. Caltrans is also in the process of developing the California Transportation Plan 2050. The admin draft is scheduled to be released for public comment in the spring of 2020, and there will be 7 public workshops held across the state to elicit feedback. On August 24th, 2018, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and US EPA issued a joint proposed rule in the Federal Register, the Safe Vehicle Rule. A key provision of the Safe Vehicle Rule would revoke California's waiver of preemption for the Advanced Clean Cars Program, Zero Emission Vehicle Mandate, and greenhouse gas standards that are applicable to model years 2021 through 2026. Monica mentioned the National Freight Strategic Plan. Caltrans is in the process of reviewing it. We'd like to ask CFAC if you have any comments that you would like Caltrans to consider on the NFSP, please send them, and we would request that by January 17th. Where's Yatman? Where do they send those comments to? Sorry? The NFSP?
We're going to be sending an email to CFAC tomorrow with all of the information and with who you should be submitting the comments to.
Okay. That's all I got.
Any other questions for the panel? Okay, and Ray, I took your comments there, so you know, we are evaluating what the impacts of the executive order is to our operations, and you know, safety is important to us, so that's, I'll take that comment back. Okay, thanks, panel. Next, we're going to jump to item number 6. So Dylan Miner with California Air Resources Board will be here to speak on the freight handbook, or the concept paper for the freight handbook. Thanks, Colin.
Hi, my name is Dylan Miner. I'm an air pollution specialist in the freight policy section of the California Air Resources Board, and today I'll be presenting on the concept paper for the freight handbook. Next slide. This document shares staff's preliminary thoughts to support public review, discussion, and feedback to help shape the freight handbook. The freight handbook will serve as an informational resource for community advocates, local decision makers, and freight facilities developers, owners, and operators to minimize air pollution from freight facilities through siting, design, construction, and operational practices. We released the concept paper for the freight handbook in December, and we'll be hosting public workshops in the first few months of the year. We really encourage you to share your thoughts and expertise in this effort, as we will be using your input and comments to help shape the development of the freight handbook. Following workshops, we will be drafting the handbook itself and aim to publish it later this year. But before I give additional detail on the structure and content of the concept paper, let me first give some background on why we're pursuing this. California's freight transportation system is vital to our economy. We have the nation's largest gateway for international trade and domestic commerce. However, diesel particulate matter is significant from the freight industry. While the freight system accounts for 1/3 of our economy, it also accounts for nearly 1/2 of the air pollution in California. Exposure to diesel particulate matter, diesel PM in particular, is a significant health concern for people of all ages, but particularly for children whose lungs are still developing, and for elderly adults who may have additional existing health concerns. The diesel emissions from these facilities impact communities both adjacent to the facilities as well as people living and working miles away. Next slide. Thank you. The freight handbook effort seeks to identify practices for freight facilities in particular, since many are being built or expanded near communities and exposing these communities to elevated concentrations of air pollution. Some of the things that we considered in developing this are that the freight facility projects we've been reviewing are not consistently considering and sufficiently considering the health risks in their siting decisions and their design, and that the transition to zero-emission technologies, even those that are available, is not occurring fast enough. In developing our practices, we are very much aware of other state policies and priorities, and work to identify practices that promote a strong freight sector and increased housing development. We realize that every project is unique and that not all of the practices we supply will be relevant to every facility, but instead we took a wide view of the range of different practices available to act as a starting point for further discussions. So with all of that context, the fundamental purpose of the Freight Handbook is to identify and encourage local practices that minimize community exposure to air pollution from these freight facilities. It will assist and encourage land use planners and local officials, community advocates, and industry to integrate emission and exposure reduction practices for freight facilities into their local plans and ordinances, as well as into facility-based decisions. We compiled the practices across a range of different existing efforts and publications and aim to identify practices that can be consistently implemented to minimize community health risk and integrate zero-emission technologies at these facilities. We particularly focused on practices for the siting design and are really encouraging people to incorporate them prior to construction when it's the most affordable to do so. Staff developed 3 different scenarios and practices specific to each one, because while each project will have unique characteristics, we wanted to identify how these practices can both minimize air pollution and support new housing and infill development. The first scenario looks at siting new freight facilities near existing communities and sensitive land uses. In this scenario, the primary focus is to integrate zero-emission technologies at the freight facilities. Where zero-emission technologies are not yet feasible, near-zero technologies fueled by renewable fuel sources could be used at facilities with a plan to transition to zero-emission in the future. We recognize that this transition will not be immediate, so we also identified siting practices, including transition zones, for facilities that operate using diesel-fueled vehicles and equipment in order to help outline actions that local governments can take to minimize community exposure to the facility's toxic emissions through both land use policies and zoning codes, among other practices. We also identified practices that can help reduce exposure to communities. That would include filtration systems, vegetative barriers, and routing truck routes away from these sensitive receptors. The transition zone concept, once again, is specific to more the diesel freight facilities, although zero-emission facilities still are our primary goal. They would provide a space between the sensitive land uses and new or developing freight facilities. And we're advocating for this because existing health risk analysis show that public exposure to air pollution can be substantially elevated near freight facilities with large numbers of diesel vehicles and equipment, but that it also decreases with the distance away from the facility. And in these areas, we recommend that there could still be development like commercial and retail uses or green spaces. Essentially, the goal is to put land uses where people will spend less time and therefore have less exposure to these to the pollution from these freight facilities. To identify these distances, we plan to work with our stakeholders through a public process to discuss the potential minimum transition zones for facilities. These recommendations can help guide local officials and developers to site the facilities and locations that will minimize community health risks. And as part of this, we also plan to conduct analysis, which could include a review of existing health risk analysis studies or modeling results from a representative facility to help support these discussions. This analysis is not intended to identify what would be considered a safe distance from a facility, because any exposure to diesel PM is still a health concern. The analysis that I'm referring to could use information from health risk analysis studies that already exist and include information like this one to help support the discussions. This graph shows the emissions from an example warehouse with normalized downwind diesel particulate matter concentrations on the left-hand side, starting at 100% and going down to 0, and the associated excess cancer risk on the right-hand side of the graph, both mapped against the distance away from the freight facility fence line. As you'll see, the concentration of emissions decreases the further away you go from a facility, and we included vertical lines at the 80, 85, 90, and 95% reduction in pollution concentration from the facility. In this example, these reductions occur respectively at approximately 1,500 feet, 2,000 feet, 3,000 feet, and 5,000 feet away from the facility fence line. This chart is an example of the recommendation that we intend to develop. X and Y on this on the right-hand side are the minimum transition zone distance recommendations for a warehouse and cold storage facility, respectively, operating with diesel-fueled equipment and vehicles. We also included a recommendation for zero-emission freight facilities, recognizing that they will not have the same cancer risk concerns, but we have heard from community members that vibration, noise, glare, and a number of other impacts to nearby residents are still of concern. So in those circumstances where the facility is operating with zero-emission technologies, we are suggesting a smaller transition zone distance of 500 feet. And once again, these are distances to separate the freight facility from sensitive land uses in particular. Scenario B, the next one is looking at areas that have existing freight facilities near existing sensitive land uses, so where everything's already built and on the ground. And as shown here, there's multiple pathways to reduce the exposure and emissions for communities from these freight facilities. Tighter federal, state, and local regulations and standards can help accelerate the transition to zero-emission technologies. In addition, government can provide additional incentives to help support the California freight industry's competitiveness and make these purchases and leases more feasible, whether through property and business improvement districts or other government programs like what the state currently has. Our third scenario looks at siting new sensitive land uses near existing freight facilities. In this case, local governments and developers can help minimize health risks by providing notice to residents or occupants of the health risks that exist, but more importantly, by reducing the emissions exposure through filtration, building design decisions, and work to establish truck routes that remove truck traffic from the near those locations. Okay, so I just finished going over the 3 different scenarios that we looked at to help inform the land use conversation. We also included a host of other practices based on a review of policy documents, existing best practices from other government agencies, planning associations, researchers, industry, and a number of sources which are listed in the concept paper itself. We also reviewed local development and siting practices, standard freight facility design practices, and operational characteristics of a number of different freight projects. We then identified potential actions that the public, local governments, and community advocates can take in order to minimize to implement these practices and minimize air pollution from these facilities. We looked at both practices that create consistency across all projects potentially in a city or county, as well as practices that are more specific to individual freight facilities. This is one of the practices in the concept paper that I'm just going to go over to show the level of detail and sort of how we broke things out. In this particular example, the practice is focused on local ordinances and the work that local governments can do to create ordinances and zoning practices that require either zero emission or near zero with renewable fuel operation at freight facilities, and the roles of the warehouse facility developers and owners, operators, to integrate and plan for those technologies in the design and siting of their, in the design and operations of their facilities. And then also suggest that community advocates can help participate in the development of such ordinances as they progress. Again, we're really seeking to partner with each of you here in order to review these practices, give us your comments and thoughts, because we want to make sure that the document, the freight handbook, when we write it, includes practices that you feel are most important to protecting communities near these facilities. Our next steps, you can find the concept paper for the freight handbook at this website. And we're asking that you please provide written comments by February 28th. I'll come back to the slide in just a second. But this is what the landing page for the freight handbook looks like. You can click on that blue button, or that is really the easiest place to find the concept paper. And then I'm happy to take questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. A couple of thoughts. One, scenario C struck me because it seems like a lot of the burdens to mitigate this issue will be placed on the freight facility when it's a new land use for sensitive. I mean, it seems kind of incongruent to put sensitive land uses new next to existing freight facilities when, given their freight competitiveness issues in the state, it's very unlikely you're going to have these freight facilities diminish in scope over time as our freight needs grow. So is there something in here, any recommendations about, whose responsibility it is to implement those mitigations? Because it seems like it's focused more on the freight facility has to do the work of rerouting trucks and putting up filters and scrubbers. And I would think that a local jurisdiction that wants to put a school next to a freight facility probably should include as part of that all the mitigations necessary that you've raised here, as opposed to imposing it on, let's say, a freight facility that otherwise, if it's expanding operations, of course, it would have a role in that. The second issue is there a disincentive for freight facilities to transition to zero emission technology if there's the mitigation of having these different physical, the transition zones, and if a facility invests in that, I'm a little worried there might be a disincentive that they might not want to go as quickly to zero emission because they're doing all the infrastructure improvements that would mitigate the emissions generated. So just two thoughts.
Okay, on the first one, thank you for your questions. We're really emphasizing a collaborative approach on all of these practices, and that's why we have broken out potential roles for each of the stakeholders, is to really not single out any party and say that the responsibility should fall squarely on them. We realize that zero-emission technologies and the practices that we're talking about will take some time and effort, and that it will take a combination of work through the local governments, through their planning policies and siting design, as well as from the freight sector, in integrating those technologies or choosing to mitigate where they feel appropriate. And in terms of citing new sensitive land uses, our main concern really is on promoting new housing throughout the state and not limiting the ability of local jurisdictions to build where they need to, but also recognizing that there are health risks and that those really should be minimized in any way possible, whether that's through filtration or working with a nearby freight facility to help improve its emissions rather than just allowing them to be sort of status quo. Then on your second question, which was, so our primary goal really is to help identify practices that make it easier to integrate zero-emission technologies. That's our desire. The transition zones are for facilities that are operating diesel emissions and equipment, vehicles and equipment in particular. So in general, that's the strategy that we felt was most feasible for reducing those impacts until that transition is made. Yes.
Not wanting to have my friend from LA Metro have the last comment, I thought I'd just, I got an easy question. You probably said this at the beginning. When will this plan be completed?
We are going to be doing outreach for the next few months and working to have the freight handbook published by the end of this year.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for your attention, and we look forward to working with you all.
So with that, it's 11:30 right now, so I think we're going to go ahead and break for lunch. We'll go ahead and give it a full hour, so we'll get back here at 12:30. After lunch, we'll be hitting items 5, 7, and 9 on your agenda, and that will wrap it up. So we'll see everybody back here at 12:30.
Hello, good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to introduce the next item 5. Dave had to step out for a bit. He'll be back in a little bit. So we're going to be having an informational presentation followed by a breakout and discussion and feedback on the implementation of the 2020 California Freight Mobility Plan. I'd like to introduce Yatmin Kwan. He's the Chief of Southern California Freight Planning.
Thank you, Nieves. So with the CFMP, California Freight Mobility Plan, I think one of the really critical pieces of a freight plan is that, let's not let it sit on the shelf, right? We have to implement and move towards our goals and visions. So as a part of the plan, we have a Chapter 6A that talks about how we plan to achieve the goals. We have goals, objectives, and strategies. And those strategies are really actions of what we should be following up with for this freight plan. However, there are about 68 strategies, and let's face it, we really can't do everything all at once. And this is where we really, really want your input, CFAC's input, to really, here we go, to talk about what Caltrans, the state, as well as partners such as you, what we should be really focused on to implement this freight plan. And so the purpose is that we to gather input from CFAC members to help focus and prioritize strategies, which have 68 of them. And to implement the plan, we need CFAC to determine which strategies should be met in short, medium, long-term futures in order for us the most essential activities to be put in motion given the limited resources that we have. And again, excuse me, this is not a Caltrans plan. This is a state plan that we really want to work with our partners to really implement that most relate to what your needs are. Again, we do have 7 goals as we went through earlier in the presentation this morning. They're economic prosperity, environmental stewardship, healthy communities, safety and resiliency, asset management, connectivity, and accessibility. Again, we have objectives to meet these goals and strategies to support those objectives. So the breakout session that we're aiming to have is for the CFAC members to help us brainstorm using the handouts, and we have 5 moderators, 1 at each table. To use the handouts, each table is to prioritize the strategies from the CFMP into short, medium, and long-term activities. By doing so, place an X for each strategy to determine the future focus, as well as if there's any notes that you want to make or highlight to us that what you feel are missing or maybe modification amendments to the strategy, we definitely welcome that. And lastly, after the breakout session, we really want to hear as a group you reporting out what you as a team felt are the most important strategies. We do have 5 tables, but there are 7 goals. So 2 of the tables will have 2 goals, while the other 3 tables will have 1 goal. Again, we're focused on what your what strategy do you feel are short-term, medium-term, and long-term. So with that said, I'm going to rely on my moderators to provide further instructions, but I think we're going to have about 20 minutes for the breakout, 25 minutes, and then we'll have another 20 minutes for report out after. So thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So Jose, so your group has a little more people. So if you could maybe give out 2 people.
So yeah, they should have 1 person come here.
Yeah.
1 person come here.
Yeah. Non-members can join. Non-members can join. Yeah. So people who are in the back, non-CFAC members, please feel free to join any table. Hey Dylan, you want to join? Sorry, calling you out there. I think we have to separate Carrie and Allison. All right. So I hope everybody had a really good discussion regarding how we'll implement the CFMP. So I think, we definitely want to hear as a group in terms of what you think are the most critical short, medium, and long-term strategies are, as well, again, anything that you feel that we miss under the specific goals that you're assigned. So to start, since Gus has the mic, maybe you want to talk about what goal your group was in charge of.
Yeah, so we had the objective goal 1, multimodal mobility. So, to start with objective 1, the first 3, we were talking about it possibly being all combined. There was some discussion about the analysis and what would draw out of the analysis, but I think in general, we're looking at short term for objective 1, and then for 2, be short, medium, and short. But I'd like to allow these gentlemen and gentle lady, if they have any comments about that. We could look at objective 1 to start off. That would be identify the causes and solutions to freight roadway bottlenecks. If you guys had any specifics.
Generally speaking, Generally speaking, the organization is something that I would change in this because you have identification of, and that really is a precedent to identify an implementation plan. So technically that should be already part of a chapter preceding this. And you could have prioritization within this if you want, but that's the first general comment. The second general comment is a lot of these really are one and the same objectives, and then you have sub-strategies. For instance, physical improvements, traditional improvements could all be lumped into one. Bottlenecks and things like dedicated truck lanes and tolling, even though that's still physical improvement, it really probably is a more medium term, long term. So you could keep that separate. So really, we had recommended MM1A being and MM2A being really one strategy under objective MM1, and then optimizing and maintaining the system. That could be its own objective, and you combine that, and all ITS is within that.
Right.
And then ITS still could also be part of new strategies to improve, but it's also part of maintaining. So you'd lump all ITS related stuff into one, MM2C, which is really TSA and TDM combined. Normally you would have those separate anyway in traditional transportation vernacular. And then even the priority corridors at ITS, again, MM3 should be again, all combined into one. Grade separations goes back into MM1A, 1B, physical improvements. And then, let's see, and then again, these other solutions, freight rail projects, everything in rail really can be combined as, it's really the same as physical improvement, but you could keep it separate. And most of these are short-term anyway. And so you'd have MM4A, 4B, and 5A is really, and 5C really part of one set of strategies and an objective for freight rail. You wouldn't have two separate freight rail objectives. The MMC, which really is not applicable to Southern California as far as I know.
I'm sorry, Kerry, can you maybe, since not everybody has the same goals as you, maybe talk about what the MMC or MM...
Oh, okay. That'll take too much more time, but but it's really combining. The gist of it is really collapsing and aggregating a lot of these, which don't lend themselves to being separate. They need to be combined in terms of the objectives and also the strategies. And most of these are short term. So Allison and I, and certainly Nancy, will definitely repeat these in our written comments to you.
Thank you.
Okay, also, I know that there's an emphasis as far as working together with the different regions, different stakeholders. The question of there possibly being an institutional goal added to what's currently there. So that was also mentioned. And did you have anything else, Allison, that you wanted to add?
Just in terms of reorganizing some of these in a way that doesn't seem so, I don't want to say random. I think there is logic here, but I think just to make it much more cogent and clear is to divide them up into strategies that address the transportation system and the supply, the infrastructure, right? And then those that help to manage demand and operations. Okay. And then within those, you've got things like the tolling, and you've got some of the information provision, those types of strategies. And I think that would really get to the multimodal element of this particular goal, because it's not the way it is right now. It's got freight roadway bottlenecks, and then you kind of have data, and then you have rail, right? And I think to really think about it as multimodal is look at the whole transportation system and all of the demand, regardless of whether it's rail or roadway improvements.
I think that covers our section.
Is there anything that you felt that we missed in this specific goal?
Is there anything that you guys think would be missing? That I think we kind of addressed it, I think.
Highway versus rail, it's kind of inherent in there. And then you have TSF, TDM, which is the ITS, and then rail addresses the demand management as well.
So I think reorganizing some of the objectives might improve clarity on what's existing now. So I think that's kind of what.
Forgot the three-dimensional though, the air travel, the air freight.
Oh.
Oh.
Oop, okay.
Oh.
That's probably
Yeah.
Drone.
long-term strategies.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Gus. Thank you. Jose?
Thank you, Yelman. So we're doing goal number 2, economic prosperity. And one of the things that the group mentioned is that we should focus on improving the efficiency of the system. So via infrastructure improvements, operational improvements, traffic management improvements, that kind of stuff that we should be focusing. The other thing we need to focus is leveraging federal funds and also advocating for more federal funds for freight. Within the strategy that actually talks about leveraging funds, the group was not in agreement what we have included in one of the proposed strategies about increasing the match, local match for formula money. I think they believe that this is going to particularly impact the counties that are not self-help, so that they didn't agree with that policy. And also focus a lot on coordination with other regions, within the regions, and focus on maybe recreating CFAC type of freight advisory committees in the local level. And because right now we do have some freight groups in some parts of the state, but they're kind of like all of their own thing. They don't communicate with each other. They don't communicate with this group as much. So I think there's an opportunity to coordinate between the different freight groups. One of the things that the table was not so keen about, or not I wouldn't say keen, is that I think everybody struggled the most is the strategies related to workforce development. And this is because the members of the table we work in transportation agencies, so we don't see that we have a direct role in workforce development. So, and we were struggling and define a role for either for the state or for regional agencies or NPOs in workforce development efforts. Within that workforce strategy or goal, they also raised the question about having affordable housing right next to freight facilities. They thought they could generate some main impacts to these type of communities. And although they do agree about also about doing commodity flows, freight flow, when I was asking, yes, we all love those numbers, those charts, those flows, that data, but what are we going to be doing with that? Especially if we're doing a commodity flow statewide, are we going to be making decisions? Are going to be making investment decisions based on those commodity flows? And that's when I think some of the members of the table were not that sure. I mean, it's kind of like we like that data, but it costs a lot of money actually to get that data. But so we're not sure so much about if the utility about doing these commodity flows on a statewide basis. Maybe we can focus more on a corridor or on a regional basis. I don't know if somebody else wants to add.
And we just talked about too, in terms of prioritizing short, medium, and long, is look at, if it's going to cost a large dollar amount, it may not be feasible to do it in the short term. The funding may not be available, but if there's something, use the term low-hanging fruit, that's something that's relatively easy to implement, maybe that should be more in the short term.
Since my table didn't select me to speak, I thought I'd just disrupt another table. Just very briefly, just to your point about public agencies and the potential for engaging in workforce development, actually there is a role. My organization is not an operator. I know down in Orange County and in LA, because their organization includes operations, they have a very robust program in both those counties to train operators, to train mechanics, and the like. LA's going even further, and I won't talk about that now, but what we're doing here in San Bernardino County, because our focus is on project development and delivery, is we're now reaching out to the school districts and developing programs with the school districts, bringing the teachers to our office, talking about specific projects within a community because that's another way to get information out to the community, but at the same time to introduce students at elementary and up through high school age of the opportunities that might exist. And so doing programs where we explain if we're replacing a bridge, for example, what it is we're doing, why we're doing it, and then they have an opportunity through the technologies that are available now where they don't have to go out when they're driving piles on a project or when they're doing something that might be really interesting to children, but they can see it in the classroom. So I think there's a lot of opportunity today that maybe wasn't available just 5 years ago with the technologies. So I would encourage anybody from the public sector to really look at what you're doing and see how you can engage, certainly at least at the school age level. Thank you.
And so I actually, to
Thank
that point, I hate to, but actually like, so I think Port of LA already has initiative, and Port of Long Beach already has similar initiative. And I think as it's grew, I think it'd be valuable for you to share what Port of LA and Long Beach have been doing with their local schools quickly, if you can.
Yeah, so Port of Long Beach has something called the Academy for Global Logistics, and what we've done is we've partnered with Cal State Long Beach and also with Cabrillo High within the San Pedro Bay area. And we've really tried to leverage Cal State Long Beach and their ability to develop curriculum to introduce into the high schools. And it's really about supply chain logistics and trying to bring high schoolers into the field early. And we've expanded that now to reach into the middle school and into the elementary levels as well. And it provides, a clear path into the university system as well. And it's been proven to be a great success. We've been highlighting a lot of the students that have come through there, and it takes resources and dedication, just reaching outside of the traditional transportation field into the academic world and into the primary school systems to try and get that set up.
Yeah, just quickly, we've been very active for over a decade now on the educational side. We in fact started and worked with LA Unified in developing a Port of Los Angeles High School, which obviously focuses on, or not focuses on, but has curriculum related to logistics and ports. And that would also include math and sciences in those areas. We're also very active in workforce development and training with ILW now, and actually erecting facilities and providing training areas for specific ILW work functions. And we've actually been involved with the Sustainable Freight Action Plan Economic Competitiveness Committee that I think Frank Ramirez was here, and we work with him on that, which does have a workforce development entity as well. So we are actively engaged at all levels.
Hi, Nancy Pfeffer with the Gateway Cities Council of Governments, Southeast LA County. As a CFAC non-member, I just would like to speak in support of the workforce development elements and goals. Those kinds of opportunities are some of the good impacts of the huge concentration of freight facilities and activity in our region. So that's something that's very important for us.
So Zay, is you have one more goal or just one goal?
No, that's it.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, my illustrious group worked on the environmental stewardship goal. We didn't have time to work on the asset management goal, unfortunately. But in terms of just some general notes while working on the environmental stewardship goal, we noticed that some of these strategies may actually belong in the asset management goal. For instance, promote the use of sustainable pavement types that enhance the movement of goods while reducing environmental impacts. We're thinking that it definitely overlaps the asset management goal. And also develop alternative freight project types that enhance the flow of wildlife while reducing commercial vehicle collisions. That could overlap with the asset management goal as well. So there is some overlap. For several of these strategies, there are political and financial and technological constraints. So we took those into account, but we didn't preclude us from making them a short-term priority. So if we thought it was a priority, we made it a priority regardless of those constraints. But we made note of these types of constraints if they exist. Some of these, and also sometimes some of these strategies require some additional data. Like for instance, for the environmental strategy to explore decarbonization of last mile delivery to decrease the freight system's impact on air quality in dense urban environments. And then it goes into several strategies regarding curbside management. We definitely need, cities and counties definitely need more curb data before they can, and some time to do analysis before they can really start enacting some meaningful ordinances regarding curbside management. So in terms of just the strategies that we chose, that I think we're supposed to report on which ones we think should be priorities in the short term. Well, we definitely think that standardizing medium and heavy vehicles and equipment charging standards and protocols, that should be a short term. So that's like charging stations and charging equipment that should be standardized in the short term. Decarbonizing the commercial freight fleet, that we think that should be a short-term priority. Decarbonizing the last mile delivery to decrease the freight system's impact on air quality, that should definitely be a short-term priority. Supporting freight technology developments and fuels data collection and analysis. That should be a short term. And promoting the use of low carbon renewable fuels development and support fuel efficiency and emission reductions requirements for moving goods to support prosperity by decreasing GHG consumption while increasing goods movement. That should definitely be a short-term priority. And promoting land uses that are conducive to protecting the environment while supporting freight operations. That should be a short-term priority. Unfortunately, CARB is already working on that, as we just saw. And incentivizing freight projects that minimize GHG criteria pollutants and other emissions. That should definitely be a short-term priority. So did anyone have any other comments? Yeah.
Just briefly, the other thing that we noticed that seemed to be a common thread throughout here is the focus might be a little bit too narrow. So the focus was on highways, rail, and on water in one instance. And so we just want to make sure that we incorporate new and emerging technologies. We've all heard of Elon Musk and the Hyperloop. There's other ideas I'm sure that'll be cropping up as people are trying to figure out how to solve the problems that we all work on. So that's all I had. Thanks, Jeff.
Great.
Thank you, Jeff. Cole?
Okay, so for our group, we were one of the lucky ones. We got 2 goals to work on. So we got healthy communities and connectivity and accessibility. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough time to prioritize which strategies should be implemented. But we did talk about which ones should be implemented in the short, medium, and long term. So for healthy communities, we felt that most of them should be are already happening or should be happening in the near future. For example, we put short term for 4 out of the 5 strategies, I believe. One being implement projects in freight corridors that are specifically targeting to avoid reducing or mitigating freight impacts on the environment and communities. Partner with metropolitan agencies, tribal organizations, and community groups to identify conveniently located locations for public workshops. Establishing development standards to avoid and mitigate environmental and social impacts on freight communities and encourage local and social equity hire provisions. And the last one being leverage partnerships to strengthen the outreach process. So all of these we felt like should be implemented or are already being implemented. But for the goal 7, connectivity and accessibility, we did have a little more contention, or we didn't all agree on. Oh, sorry.
It's all right.
we weren't in full agreement. All right. So for these ones, we weren't in full agreement for a lot of the strategies. We felt that, these strategies and our objectives were mainly tech heavy, and a lot of it had to do with data collection, how, one thing we talked about a lot was autonomous vehicles and truck platooning. It was like, how is that technology going to evolve over the upcoming years, whether it be short, medium, and long. And yeah, we were kind of all over the place with that one. But so for strategy 1A, we thought that should be either short or medium freight plan priority for projects, implementing state-of-the-art and demonstration technologies. One of the things we had mentioned was it's going to take a lot of investment, whether it be private or public dollars. And one thing that was mentioned was if it's in the medium term, it's no longer state-of-the-art, so that was one thing. Okay. Strategy 1B, support pilot projects for autonomous truck platooning. And this was one that we had a lot of discussion about, whether private companies are going to continue funneling money through R&D, and what is the level of liability and risk for these companies? If there is an incident, how are California laws or just laws in general going to evolve around that? Yeah, if you guys have anything else to add, those are the main ones we talked about.
Thank you all. Thank you. Last but not least, Rena. Yes, ma'am.
Wasn't sure if I was being asked to stick to 2 minutes. So our team has the goal number 5 for safety and resiliency, and that's to reduce freight-related deaths and injuries and to improve the system resiliency by addressing infrastructure vulnerabilities related to security threats, climate change impacts, and natural disasters. So one of the goals that our team felt should be a short-term focus would be expanding the system of truck parking facilities. The team seemed to feel that that should be fairly quicker to build in comparison or relative to some larger infrastructure and more complex infrastructure type projects, whereas expanding parking opportunities should be achievable in the short term. And then some folks also talked about how policy and technology should really be used to help us implement those strategies. And then on 1B, 5.1b, short, they also felt that this should be short term. There was some discussion about whether it should be short term or medium term, and also the way that that reads. So the strategy is to promote public-private partnership for implementation of truck stop and shipping terminal vehicle charging or charge in motion. And so some things were discussed about, well, if it's promotion of the partnership, promoting efforts should really be short term. That should be happening now. But if it is the implementation of the charging infrastructure and the charge in motion infrastructure technology, then that's more medium term. So the language on that strategy is very important. And then on developing design guidelines for truck routes that consider other modes, there was some discussion about whether that would be long-term or possibly medium-term, and also a suggestion on rephrasing that because the strategy was not entirely clear until they started to read into the sub-strategy of what that really meant. And so then they start to understand that that was a lot about complete streets guidance and curbside management and things like that. So the suggestion was to rephrase that to state something along the lines of incorporate truck route considerations in the complete streets guidance for Caltrans. For the Caltrans Complete Streets Guidance. And then on strategy 5.1d, they felt that this should be a short term. This was consensus in the group. It seems like everyone felt that should be short-term focus. And then 2a, which is to expand the number and scope of cargo security screenings. Not total consensus within the group, went kind of back and forth on whether that would be medium or long-term strategy. And then ensuring consistency and effective safety and security requirements at all California ports. Folks felt like that was mostly a long-term strategy. and identifying alternate freight routes to maintain freight movement at times of disruption by disaster. There was a bit of discussion on whether that would be short-term or long-term. So the reason for the difference in that was, well, one, there's a sub-strategy that talks about conducting a study on alternate routes. They felt that that should be short-term. That's something that we can initiate right away. Long-term kind of came up because natural disasters is very complex, and the response to natural disasters and reopening of the roadway and evacuation and things like that are probably first priority, and then second priority would be, well, once the roadways are back open, then we would be able to move goods. And then we didn't get to finish the rest of the strategies. We did run out of time, but does the team have anything you want to highlight, add, or clarify? Okay.
Great, thank you. Thank you for all your input. This is extremely valuable to our implementation of the freight plan. So I do want to keep in mind, and maybe I failed to mention this earlier, is that this freight plan, again, it's not a Caltrans freight plan. It's the state of California's freight plan. And these actions and strategies we're working to prioritize is a partnership between Caltrans and our regional partners and our local partners. So again, we look forward to working with you to implement the freight plan, and this is really valuable input, and thank you very much for your input. Thank you.
Okay, moving along here, so we'll take a moment to kind of get reset up, and I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Kimberly Collins, Professor of Public Administration, Executive Director of the Leonard Transportation Center, Jack H. Brown College of Business and Public Administration with CSU San Bernardino. She will be here presenting planning for a sustainable and equitable global business system in the Inland Empire. That's okay. Welcome. All right, welcome. Do we got the?
It's there.
Okay.
All right. I'm just going to set a timer. I'm a professor. I could just, talk for too long. Okay, I'd like to thank you all for being here today and for coming to our campus, and hopefully you got to walk around a little bit. We have a beautiful campus. I know a lot of it's under construction, but it's really a great place to work, and I'm really happy that you could all come and visit us for the day. So just really quick, let's see, there we go. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the LTC. Some of you know who we are, some might not know who we are. Some of the regional challenges, which you all know about, but just to kind of briefly go through. And then think about some regional programming that it's conceptualizing and really trying to put forward to create some synergy in this region to make some change. So just really briefly, the LTC was founded a little over 10 years ago by Bill Leonard and his family. And they've been very proactive in having the center be part of the community. I've been the executive director now just for a few years, and so we've been redesigning and rethinking of our program goals and of how we're going to be working within the community. So a lot of it is looking at community development, workforce development and education, some research that we've been doing, and I'll go briefly through all those. A big part of what we're working is to think about, and this is what our project is, to rethink and to create, I teach public policy, so putting out these big goals of how to have a more equitable, sustainable transportation system in the IE. And that includes freight, but also other types of transportation within the region. So really thinking and rethinking how we could have that. So just some of our community development, we have a dialogue series. I don't know if any of you have seen it. We've had over 40 national and statewide experts come and speak about different issues to convene, again, the community together to think about the different types of transportation issues that are occurring in the Inland Empire. Part of this is we've recorded most of these talks, and we have a series now that we'll be putting on our website called Transportation Talks. So again, as a professor, you know, if you're teaching, they're great to pull down and have a guest speaker within your class, or in other types of forums if you really wanted to have individuals who are experts within the region talking about specific issues. And we have close to, I think, 30 transportation talks now. We also have a number of different books that we're putting out that looks at case studies for teaching and such. And then we've had a lot of community support from this with sponsorship from the HNTB, but also from the San Bernardino International Airport, EXP, Foothill Transit, and Valley College, which is really thinking of changing their technicians program from diesel trucks over to electric vehicles, electric heavy-duty vehicles. So working in partnership with the regional colleges and such. Some of the workforce development, so we have a fully online leadership planning and performance course institute that we are offering to Caltrans employees in particular. So we've had 4 cohorts go through. It's a free program that they're doing, and it's been received very well from the Caltrans employees that have gone through. We've done some projects and working. We have a National Center of Excellence in Cybersecurity here at Cal State San Bernardino. And so working with the Western Riverside Council of Governments, thinking about cybersecurity and some of the surface transportation issues that are out there. So we've been working with them and hope to ramp that up additional to really move forward and get in front of many of the threats that could possibly be out there regarding cybersecurity and our surface transportation infrastructure. We are starting out, and I don't know if you received some of this flyer, through the generous donations from the Leonard family. We're starting a student-led research challenge. It's to have a multidisciplinary approach, working with teams from Cal Poly Pomona, because our university does not have engineering, as you all know, but Cal Poly Pomona, they have their civil engineers and others, and their planning department, as well as UC Riverside. So the 3 sort of sister public institutions working together, getting our students to rethink and to plan out how do we deal with these issues, particularly right now, of the equity and sustainability within the system. And, you know, I always think, like, who put us on the moon? It was the 27-year-olds, right? They were thinking about how to re-engineer and how to rethink the system so that we could push it out and go someplace else. And so we're hoping through this research challenge that those students will help us go someplace else and really rethinking about the system. So we are starting this up. The deadline for applications, if you know any students that are out there that are interested, to go to our website, call us, visit us, email me. We're going to be accepting applications by April 15th of this year and starting up the research program this summer. So really quick, you know, we have one of the largest 2-state counties here in the Inland Empire, and a population over 4 million. So it's a huge space. We have rural, desert communities, mountain communities, you know, suburban, metropolis. So it's a wide range and a huge mix of needs that occur. And we, even though our unemployment rate has gone down, particularly because of the rise in the logistics industry and freight within the region, we still have high rates of poverty in our community. A lot of the commutes, as you all know, long commutes as people who live in the Inland Empire go to Orange County and LA County to work. And so that also contributes quite a bit to the greenhouse gas emissions that we have in our community, as well as the as some of the particulate matter and other environmental conditions that are harmful. So logistics in the community, as you know, we have about 10% of all the logistics warehousing in the nation. are here in the Inland Empire. So I think it's only really the state of Pennsylvania that has more percentage of actual logistics facilities in their region, and it continues to grow. And it has created a wonderful tax base. It's created a lot of synergy for us. It's created a lot of employment. We're really contributing to the state economy as goods move through here. We have, I believe, up to, it's about, I think, almost 12 now Amazon fulfillment centers within our region. So there's a lot of activity that's occurring, and it has been really great for us, right? But there's also been some concerns, particularly about the regional environmental impact and what's going to happen with transportation funding if we are unable to meet some of the criteria pollutants that are in our community. Also, if we are unable to get really within containment of greenhouse gas emissions, what that means for our community. There's a lot of concern about social cohesion and about young people staying in the community to continue to work because of what are their job opportunities, where do they really want to be, where do they want to go. So we have to consider these issues as well in thinking about how to create stronger, more socially cohesive communities that win off of the logistics industry and just don't have the negative externalities that come with it. And so from that, thinking about it from really a design thinking principle, right? Where do we want to go and how do we want to move it so that it becomes that win-win situation for us? So in applying these different types of understandings in design thinking, right? We need to understand, we need to appreciate, we need to move the topics forward, and we need to think of how to use the new technologies to our best advantage. And so within that, we think about, how do we create a space that can help us move that forward? So based on some of the principles that are happening in multinational organizations, so ideas that are occurring in other parts of the world, particularly with the OEDC and the UN, in thinking about the indicators that need to be collected and the ideas that need to be generated to really push forward these ideas, particularly of equity, social equity, and sustainability. And so bringing together, again, creating that space for the public sector, for the private sector, and for the universities and academics to come together to really think about how to make these improvements. And so from there, we're working with the San Bernardino International Airport right now to develop a smart transportation idea hub. And within that idea hub is to have the data analytics, to be able to collect the information and to understand where do we want to go? And partly we're going to be doing that with our research challenge. So having different students from different disciplines, again, defining, thinking about what does equity and sustainability mean for road engineering projects, right? It's partially addressed in this freight plan that's being put together, but it needs to be addressed from these ideas of from a civil engineering perspective. We need to think about it from a finance perspective. So what is a transportation finance? How do they define what's going to be an equitable, and sustainable project? Thinking about it from a public sector or governance. What are your institutions? How are your institutions dealing with it? And from that data and setting up sort of your long-term goal, again, thinking about it from a long-term goal within the government, 20 years, 40 years from now, what does it look like? Putting together these different pieces so that you have the smart cities and the Internet of Things. So the new technologies that are going to be out there, testing ground, bringing businesses together, again, with university folks so that we can start to grow up some new businesses in town that are actually working on these technologies and not always just thinking about, bringing in a company from LA or from the Bay Area, but really bringing it up, again, from the local community. Working on cybersecurity, We have to keep that at the forefront. And again, Cal State San Bernardino, we have one of the leading programs in cybersecurity in the nation right now. So really playing off what we have there. Working on entrepreneurship and governance. So rethinking how government can respond and be more integrated with local companies so that we don't see so much of the conflict, but we can see, again, solutions coming out of both of those sectors. And then moving on to, having our students. So we're going to have these students coming from the different universities, working on their research projects, but then allowing them to interact with business and government so that they can see that there's a place for them to go and to, once go being, someplace within the Inland Empire, to have their jobs and to have their families and to have the growth within their community so that they're not thinking about they have to leave and go someplace else. And from that, we're also working with the school district on a pathway to logistics, similar to what's happening out in the Long Beach area. And it's Amazon gave a bit of money to the high school that's just crossed away, the Cajon High School. So really working with that project and continuing to build off on a pathway to logistics to get young people excited about the logistics industry and not just to think, I'm going to be working the warehouse floor and my life is going to be really hard and then I'm going to try and find something else. But rethinking what that means. And that's it. That's all I have on my presentation. But we're hoping to move this forward. We're applying from outside funding. I'm looking for comments. If anybody has any ideas, I'm really here just to take a moment to say this is a conceptualization of what we're thinking about. But and I appreciate the time to talk about it, and I hope to get some feedback so that we can have the best and, a really good project that's going to help the Inland Empire. Thank you.
Is the Leonard Transportation Center part of the CSU consortium utilizing SB1 research funds? I know under the Medina Transportation Institute.
So as part of being part of the Cal State system, we can apply for the funds, but we're not part of the consortium.
Oh.
That was Mineta, it's Fresno, and
Long Beach.
yeah, I think it was Long Beach as well, yeah. Okay, well, if you have anything, I would appreciate any comments, and yeah, have a good rest of the day.
Okay, we're on to the last agenda item, which means I'm holding you guys up from getting out of here. So first off, on that last agenda item, we have public comments. Is there any public comments? Okay. Wanted to wrap up here. There's a couple things I did want to highlight that we did get some, I'll call them action items or items for consideration as we held our topics today. So, part of that is looking at our alignment with Regions Rise and how we distribute and looking at our project list and how we look at with the different distribution Regions Rise. Looking at the long-term project list, the projects beyond 2025, the possibility of incorporating those in the CFMP. We heard members would like to update their projects and provide discussions about how those projects, the alignment of those projects was determined. We mentioned we're taking comments on that, so please provide us the comments on that during this comment period here this month. There was some comments about the importance of the ports section and incorporating the importance of ports within a national context. Let's see, and then providing the input there on the project. So we are taking the information. We will take a look at it. I do want to take a moment and just thank the freight team for putting this meeting together. It takes a lot of effort to pull all this together, so I just want to thank Nieves Castro, Yatman Kwan, Erin Thompson and her team, Karan Parmar, Allison Neal, and the other district staff that came out and helped out today. So I greatly appreciate that. We will be getting information out on next steps. As you know, we got the comment period closing here towards the end of the month. And so we'll be in communications out there with the team. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming today and participating. Did I forget anything, Yatman? Okay, so thank you for coming, and have safe travels back to wherever you're going.